there's something that we really need to talk about, and that is X himself. Since the beginning of the story, I've always just assumed that X was some hero prodigy with innate talent like Queen, but to an even greater extent. However, we've recently gotten to see a little bit of X's rise to power, and it immediately proved the exact opposite. When X burst onto the scene becoming the #1 hero, he was completely unknown and shocked the entire world in an upset where he completely embarrassed the two top hero contenders, Boa and Queen. However, something about this just really fell off to me, because it's super common in anime for some unknown challenger to enter the story and turn things upside down. But that just shouldn't be possible in 2B Hero X. The entire power system is based on things like trust and fame. So how on earth could X be so much stronger than any hero we've seen so far, even when he was an absolute nobody with no supporters, no trust, and not even a historical record? I mean, that just goes against everything we know about how the world of 2B Hero X works. So there must be something they aren't telling us, some X factor, you could say, that we don't yet know about. And I think to figure this out, we need to look at some earlier battles, where somebody won against someone with more trust than them, although still not nearly to the same extent as X versus Queen. And I think one of the best examples of this was Yang Chang versus the original Isol. Of course, there's no way to exactly measure who had more trust during the fight, due to Isol's trust decreasing and Yang Chang's increasing simultaneously. But I think it's very clear that at the very least in the beginning of the fight, Isol still had a pretty big advantage in terms of raw trust and therefore power. But despite this, we know that Yang Chang still won. And I think the reason for that is because of two things. We know that raw trust is the most important factor when it comes to fights in 2B Hero X. But what Yang Chang showed us is that resolve, or a belief in yourself, is also a large factor. Since for the majority of the fight, Yang Chang was honestly getting bullied and couldn't even fight back because of Isol's shield. The only reason he was able to prolong the fight as long as he did and eventually wear Isol down to a point where he could land a hit was because Yang Chang refused to give up. He got up over and over and over again until finally something worked. However, arguably what was even more vital to Yang Chang's victory was his battle IQ, or plan. He went into the fight knowing that his only way of winning was getting Isol to use his most powerful attack and then countering it through his own speed, due to inside information from Uncle Rock, which is exactly what happened and how he won. But as much as battle IQ and resolve contributed to Yang Chang's victory, you could argue that the public perception and the storyline of the underdog fighting his heart out and not giving up is what ultimately swayed the incredibly volatile trust values in his favor and led to his victory, which would mean Yang Chang's victory was still reliant on trust value. But the reason that I bring all this up is to showcase how practically none of it applies to X. We've already determined that battle IQ and resolve have to play some role, but X didn't need any resolve. He wiped the floor with everyone in his way. And the idea that he somehow knew the weaknesses of every hero he fought and was able to perfectly exploit it within seconds seems wildly unlikely. And we know from Queen's father's report that nothing at all was known about him, which should mean he had little to no trust value leading up to the hero tournament. So what I'm implying is that it's not that X is stronger or smarter or even wants it more than anyone else. He is a completely different kind of hero, whose power has to have a different source or different rules. And I have a few ideas on how it might work. The first of these relies on the idea that all trust is not created equally, which I think is pretty safe to say, since it makes sense that the more devout a hero's fan base is, the more trust each individual supporter puts into the hero. And Cyan's origin supports this, since she only gained the trust of a handful of people on the plane, but still managed to survive from certain death and become a beacon of good luck as a result. And that's because even though she only earned a few people's trust, those people put all of their faith and even hope for the future into her. which seemed to give her far more trust than a couple of fans who follow their favorite heroes on social media. This means that it's possible X had a similar origin to Cyan, but to a much greater magnitude, where a group of people who were either about to die or for some other reason put every single ounce of trust and faith that they had into X, allowing him to reach immense power without being widely known. However, I am going to have to push back a little on this theory, because we know that the plane crash where Cyan gained her powers was a national tragedy and was reported on by practically every news outlet. So for something similar to happen for X, but to an even greater magnitude and without anyone knowing about it, seems a little unlikely. However, it could also be due to fewer people, like one or two who put even more faith in X than Cyan's parents and the people on the plane put into Cyan, which again seems unlikely but is a possibility. Another factor that could be the source of X's power is his belief in himself. We know that a person's belief in themselves does have at least some effect on their power, like when Linling's belief in himself and love for Moon allowed him to shed the title of Nice and become a completely new hero. It's also clear that Queen's entire rise to power was built off her own belief in herself, and it's likely why she beat Boa even in their second fight when Boa was clearly overpowering her. This theory makes a lot of sense until you take into account Queen's battle with X. We already know that Queen has an incredible innate belief in herself, and against X, she was drastically the favorite, so she should have had even more belief than normal. But still, she didn't even stand a chance. You could say that she was confused or anxious because X had upset Boa previously, but even then, how did Boa lose to someone that by all measurable statistics, she should have wiped the floor with? It just doesn't really make sense. However, what I think is a slightly more likely possibility is that X is a manufactured or fake hero. And there are two ways you could look at this. X could be a fake hero because he, like Linling's boss, uses fear or some other type of emotion to gain power, which wouldn't require him to be well known or beloved to be strong. For example, if you can gain power by gaining trust and fear, maybe X got his power by gaining joy, love, hope, or some other emotion that you can argue is more potent than trust. Or he could be a fake hero by being completely artificial, like he was secretly taught or even created by a hero agency to play the perfect, idealistic role of a hero, so that he can embody society's trust in heroes as a whole. This would mean that people having a vague trust in heroes to protect or save them, which we know is practically every normal person in the show, would automatically place trust in X. And I have no idea how that would work. Maybe X purposefully became vague by wearing white, taking the name of X, and having a power that is extremely hard to quantify, which could be what allowed him to embody such a vague and overpowered concept. But really, there's no way to know for sure. It's possible that X is just special, and he was meant to be a hero more than anyone else. Or he could have a power that is so broken that it doesn't matter how little trust value he had, because as long as he can activate it, anyone he fights against is rendered useless. Whatever the source of X's strength is, I'm sure that it is going to completely break 2B Hero X, because using everything we know, his come up should be impossible. But there's something about him that makes the impossible possible.